I'm sure that by now you guys have heard of this game called Among Us, so I thought it would be fun to give the main character a try. It is a very simple character and it uses the tools that we learned in Unit 5, so we're going to be creating that today. So the first thing is that I found a reference image for the front face of this character. Usually the only thing that you see anytime that you look at these characters is a 3/4 view, which is not helpful if we're trying to use it as our reference. We need something that is in an orthographic view, meaning top, front, or right. I got this front image, so this is what we're going to be using as a reference. So let's bring this image in our front view, and the image right now is way too big, so we need to make it smaller. Let's go to Mode, View Settings, and the Back tab, and make it smaller in Y to 500 centimeters, and size X will be proportional to that. Let's also increase the transparency because it is a bit too bright and we won't be able to see our object. And now let's get started. We are going to be doing a lot of work in the front view as well as in the perspective view. So it's mostly going to be in the 4-panel view so that we can see both. Let's take out a sphere object because this character is rounded. So the sphere is the best match to start this off with. However, there's a few things to note about the sphere. The first is that the regular type of sphere actually has triangles in the top. Triangles should be avoided whenever possible. So we need to change the type to hexahedron, which will give you a sphere that is made entirely out of quads. General rule of thumb is that when you are box modeling or when you're doing any type of polygonal modeling, you want to start with the fewest segments you possibly can have. The point of box modeling or polygonal modeling is that you start with a very basic shape and then you build onto that shape. You do not want to start with 1,000 different segments because then you are required to position all of those segments, and it is way harder to move 30 points than it is to move 3 points. So based on that logic, we need to reduce the segments of this. I am bringing them down to 8 because 8 still gives me a spherical shape, but there's very few segments. Now let's make this editable, and I named it a body in the Objects Manager. Once it is editable, we want to start altering the points. So change to point mode, and here I am changing to my rectangle selection because by default, the rectangle selection comes with only select visible elements checked off. And since we are working in the front view, I want to make sure that any selection that I make in the front view will select through the entire object. We're making the shape of this object, and we want to make sure that we're not just making the shape in the front of the sphere, but also making it in the back of the sphere. So this is more of a personal choice and just the way that I work. I tend to switch between my life selection and my rectangle selection depending on if I'm selecting visible elements or not. The rectangle selection already comes with it checked off, so I don't change any of my settings, and I know that if I change to my rectangle selection, I'll be selecting through. And if I go to my life selection, it has it automatically set on, so I know that if I'm in a life selection, I am only selecting things that are visible. This is, again, just personal preference and just the workflow that I have gotten to all these years. You guys can do whatever you want. Just be aware that it is very, very, very important that you know whether you have only select visible elements on or off. You do not want to do this to your object. So using this shape right here, what we want to do is to bring the top points of the shape, so only the top portion, not counting the middle, towards the top of the character reference, and then take the middle of the character and the bottom portion and put it along the bottom of the character without counting its legs. Now that we have this shape, I want to start adding some segments so that we can better block out the shape of this character. So you want to press KL on your keyboard for your loop cut. And let's make a cut in between these two edges. And let's press the plus button to add 2 more of these cuts. Now these cuts were added following the general shape of the sphere, but I actually want them to be flat. So what I am doing is that I am selecting the entire row of points and scaling them down. This will make them be aligned to each other. Notice that I am doing this one row at a time. Alright, so this is the shape that we get when we have all of those segments. What we want to do now is use the points that are on the outside and match them to the outline of our reference. So I am using my rectangle selection because I want to make sure that I am selecting through the entire object, and I am going to scale these points outwards until the points that are on the outside match the outline of this reference. Take a look around your object and make sure that you selected through. We want to make sure that the changes that we're doing are happening to the entire object and not just the visible portion on the front of the object. Now that we have this, we are going to make the legs. However, I don't want to have to make 2 separate legs, so we are going to use the symmetry object to create a symmetrical half for this body. So you want to select all of the points on the left side of your screen, which would be the right of your character, and delete them. Make sure that you do not select the points that are right in the middle of your character. Once they are deleted, you want to make the body a child of the symmetry object. And what the symmetry object did is that it created a perfectly symmetrical half of a body, and because the middle points are at 0, it looks like they are merged together. So now when we go and make the legs, we only have to worry about one side and only changing the points on one side, and the same thing will happen to the other side. Moving on to making the legs, let's change to the polygon mode and select the 2 polygons that are on the side of this body. Make sure that you are not selecting through the object. That's why I switched to my live selection, because I only want to select those 2 polygons. Now press D on your keyboard for the extrude tool and extrude it out just a little bit, because once it's extruded, we can go to our move tool and make further alterations from there. Now let's begin moving our legs to place them where our reference legs are. And as you can see, the polygons are currently rotated, so let's flatten that out by aligning them using your scale tool and scaling down to 0% in Y. Once they are flat, you want to bring that to the bottom where the leg would go. Notice how everything that you were doing to just that one side is also happening to the other side. So now it's a matter of moving points around until we get to the shape that we're happy with. So the first 2 points that I want to alter are these 2 that are connecting the top of the leg to the bottom of the leg, because right now they're just a little bit too into the character itself. So I want to bring those out, as well as bring that top point of the leg down a little bit and bring in the nether region point up slightly. So just as a quick reminder, since we are about to start moving and scaling a lot of points, to select a specific point, go to your live selection by pressing 9 on your keyboard. To move a point, use your move tool by pressing E on your keyboard. And to bring 2 points closer together or further apart at the same time, use your scale tool by pressing T on your keyboard. Next, I want to select this entire loop of points so that we can make this slightly more rounded. However, when we select that loop using UL loop selection, you can see that it selects some wrong points because of the way that that loop ends. So holding Command or Control on your keyboard, you can deselect certain points, and holding Shift, you can select some other points. Once we have this selection, we want to scale it together because we want that portion of the body to look slightly more rounded. So I am scaling these in the Z just slightly. Alright, so now let's move on to the feet. What we want for the feet ultimately is a hexagonal shape. So let's select the 2 points on the top and scale them down so that they would be aligned. I'm scaling down in the Z. and I am also moving in Z. And then doing the exact same thing to the points in the bottom, scaling them and moving them in. The 2 points on the left and the right, I am bringing them inwards slightly, because once again, we want that hexagonal shape. And we're left with this type of shape. All of this point moving is happening with my live selection, which means that I only selected the points that I could see and did not select through. If you by mistake selected through, make sure that you Control or Command Z to undo. Make sure that your foot is aligned to the reference the way that mine right now is not. So I have to go in and select it, scale it down, and align it better. Now let's take out a subdivision surface and make sure that you make the symmetry object a child of the subdivision. We have now a 3-level hierarchy. First the subdivision surface, then the symmetry, then the polygonal object. And notice how the subdivision surface rounds out our entire object. I am naming my subdivision surface body and moving on to continue editing this. Pretty neat. Now let's just add some additional details. So the first thing is that the feet are a little bit too round. So we are going to need to sharpen that edge by adding a cut near the foot. So you're going to press KL for your loop cut, add a cut, and then interactively alter this cut until it reaches near the bottom so that the foot flattens out on the bottom. Now let's fix some of the points so that it matches the reference better. Once again, make sure that you are selecting through when you are fixing points in the front view so that you are selecting the entire object. And let's add an additional cut in between these two edges so that we can also sharpen that edge. I added a loop cut, so that is KL. Make sure that you are looking at both your front view and your perspective view so that you can see how your geometry looks. When I was adding that cut, I made the cut multiple times and was not happy with the placement, so I would Control Z to go back and then try again. Making sure to look at my perspective view as well as doing a lot of render previews to see how my final model was looking. This will force us to also change some of the points. This is going to be a little bit of playing around with. Not everyone's going to have the exact same points in the exact same place. Just make sure that you're altering yours until you are happy with them. I am not going to speed through any of this so that you can see what it is that I am doing. I am selecting this leg point right here so that I can scale it out a little bit and make that portion of the leg match the body a bit better. And right here in the nether region of this character that is a little bit too much pinching. And just to show you the difference, right here it is 2 because it's still in the viewport even if it's a render preview. And out here when I am rendering is 3. Notice the difference in the pinching. Now I am going back and just further editing some points until it matches the reference a little better. As a note, if you want to toggle between having your generator on or off, which the subdivision surface is a generator, you can press Q on your keyboard and that will activate or deactivate your generator. Let's continue moving points. You are not limited to moving your points from left to right, up and down. Remember that this is a 3D software, so let's not forget about Z. So you can select some of the points and bring them forward so that we could give this little guy a bit of a belly. Notice that I am only selecting the points in the front and not the points in the back. We're adding a belly, so we do not need to select through. If you make a mistake with your selections, remember Control or Command Z to undo. Alright, now let's move on to add the little backpack that the character carries. So let's move to the back of this character, change to polygon mode, select 6 of the back polygons. You can deactivate your generator here so you can see the big square polygons instead of seeing them rounded. Once you have them selected, you want to press I on your keyboard for extrude inner. Click and drag towards the left until you get to around 8.5 centimeters on the offset of your inner extrude. And that is going to make an inner extrusion of the polygons that you had selected. This is going to serve as our backpack. After doing an inner extrude, you get a loop of new polygons that got created. We want to select and delete the polygons that are right in the middle because we do not want them to separate our symmetry. By the way, the only reason that I am only seeing half of my object right now is because my symmetry object is deactivated. Once you have them selected, you want to press backspace or delete on your keyboard. Change to point mode to close that hole by selecting those points in the center and zeroing them out in X. Now let's further edit this inner extrusion that we made by grabbing some of the points and aligning them to each other. We want the back to be a square because this is going to be a backpack. Notice how I am only editing the new points that got created once I made the inner extrude. Once we are happy with the way that our back looks, let's switch to polygon mode and select the back polygons. And we want to extrude these out. However, if you use the regular extrude tool and you extrude, you get an extrusion that is following the direction of these polygons. However, this is not what we want because then we have to further edit that. What we want is for the extrusion to go backwards in Z, following the axis, not the direction of the polygons. So I am going to show you this trick, which is with your move tool selected, E on your keyboard, and command or control held, you can see these little white boxes. If you click and drag while those little white boxes are showing, you are going to extrude in the direction of your axis. Let's flatten out the backpack in the back by grabbing those polygons and scaling them down in Z. And let's make the backpack a little sharper by adding a loop cut. I quickly switched to my live selection so that I can select some of the points of the backpack and edit them. So for example, the corner points, I am going to select them and scale them slightly together and push them back so that it is a more rounded shape. By the way, I am leaving this view in the 4-panel view because it is easier for you to see how many points I am selecting. And upon looking at the reference image, I realized that the backpack is actually a lot bigger than what I did here. So to fix this, I am changing to my rectangle selection, and I am only selecting the backpack points, which are the points that were created with my inner extrude and the points and polygons that were created with my extrude. If you select any points that you did not want to, you can always go, in my case, to live selection to select individual points and command click on them to deselect them. I am scaling them upwards so that the backpack gets a little bigger. And now I'm just fixing some of the points in the bottom to make sure that I don't have any intersecting geometry. This is why it is a good idea to toggle back and forth between having the subdivision surface active and deactive, because sometimes you can make a change with your subdivision surface active and not realize that your blocky geometry, which is the one without the subdivision surface, is actually crossing itself. Once again, this is going to require a lot of moving points until you get to a place that you are happy with. I am going to speed through things a bit here so that we're not just looking at me moving points for the next 5 minutes, but I do want to point out that at a certain point here, I realized that I needed this to be smoother in the viewport, not just in the renderer. So I went to my subdivision surface and increased my viewport subdivision to 3. So now they're both at 3. So the next thing that we are going to do is that we are going to make the visor of this character. Let's make this using a separate object. So let's take out another sphere. Once again, let's change it to a hexahedron so that we're only worried about quads. And let's make it editable. I'm doing Control A to select them all, hiding my body. And I am now going to squish down this sphere using my scale tool until it fits around the reference image. Once that's done, I am going to show my body once again and squish my sphere in Z and fit that inside of the character. It is, of course, a little too choppy, so let's also make that sphere a child of a subdivision surface. And let's name it. Now let's create some materials for this. So double click on your materials manager and add whatever color you'd like. I played around with the colors a little bit. I also color picked from the actual characters. So if this is something that you want to do, feel free to. And we're done. Make sure that you get a good angle for your render. You can group the visor and the body into one null to make a specific character, and then copy that null and create another one if you want to have more than one character. I hope this was fun. I will see you guys for the next tutorial.